The laughter echoed through the Galactic Academy's engineering bay like the chittering of excited insects. Marcus Chun, barely 18 Earth years old, stood beside his jury-rigged starship engine while his alien classmates pointed their various appendages at his work and made sounds that translated roughly to mockery in 17 different languages. The human thinks he can improve upon Zephyrian engineering, clicked Kextar, his insectoid mandibles clacking with amusement. The tall, mantis-like alien gestured at Marcus's modifications with one of his forearms. 5,000 years of advanced technology, and this primitive species believes they understand better. Vira, a crystalline being whose body chimed musically when she moved, added her own harmonic laughter. Perhaps on his backward planet, hitting things with rocks passes for engineering. But this is the Academy. We learn real science here. Marcus felt his cheeks burn, but he kept his hand steady as he continued calibrating the fusion matrix. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Let them laugh, boy. The best engineers always get laughed at first. Then, they changed the galaxy. Professor Thane, a massive reptilian Draknari with scales that shifted color based on his mood, loomed over the students. His current shade of deep purple indicated his displeasure with the disruption. Silence. Chun, explain your modifications to the standard Z-class engine. The classroom fell quiet except for the subtle hum of the station's life support systems. Marcus wiped his hands on his coveralls and gestured to his engine. I've recalibrated the plasma injection sequence and modified the magnetic containment field geometry. The standard design wastes approximately 37% of its fuel through incomplete fusion cascade. More chittering and chiming filled the air. Vornek, a gaseous being contained in an environmental suit, spoke through his translator in a voice like escaping steam. Impossible. Zephyrian engineers are the greatest in the galaxy. Their designs are perfect. Perfect for Zephyrian physiology and thinking patterns, Marcus replied calmly. But humans see things differently. We look for inefficiencies that other species might consider acceptable losses. Professor Thane's scales shifted to orange, indicating curiosity mixed with skepticism. Demonstrate. Marcus activated his modified engine. The fusion chamber glowed brighter than any of his classmates had ever seen from a training unit. The energy output readings on the wall display climbed steadily past the normal operational parameters of a standard Z-class engine. Gasps and clicks of surprise rippled through the watching students. The engine's output stabilized at 143% of normal efficiency. The classroom fell silent except for the smooth, almost musical hum of perfectly balanced fusion. Interesting, Professor Thane rumbled, his scales now a swirling pattern of orange and gold. Where did you learn these techniques? This level of intuitive understanding typically requires decades of experience. Marcus hesitated. He could see the genuine curiosity in his professor's large golden eyes, but he also noticed how his classmates had gone quiet. They weren't laughing anymore, but their stillness felt more dangerous than their mockery. My grandfather taught me some things about engines, he said finally. Basic maintenance and theory. Kextar's compound eyes focused on Marcus with sudden intensity. What was your grandfather's name? James Chun. He was just a mechanic on Earth. Marcus began powering down his engine, uncomfortable with the attention. He worked in civilian shipyards, nothing special. The insectoid's four arms crossed over his thorax in a gesture Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. James Chun. Human. Mechanic. Kextar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed the information. What years did he work? Most of his life. Started young. Worked until he died 5 years ago. Why? Vira's crystalline form suddenly rang out a pure, clear note of recognition. Chun. James Chun. The human mechanic who... She stopped mid-sentence, her light dimming as if she'd realized she'd said too much. Professor Thane's scales shifted to deep red, and he moved closer to Marcus with surprising speed for such a large creature. Student Chun, I believe we need to have a private conversation about your family history. Class dismissed. Everyone except Chun. Report to Laboratory 7 for standard diagnostics training. As his classmates filed out, Marcus caught fragments of whispered conversations in various alien languages. He couldn't understand most of the words, but the tone was universal. Fear, respect, and something that sounded almost like reverence. When the last student left, Professor Thane sealed the engineering bay doors and activated privacy shields that would prevent any eavesdropping. The massive Draknari scales had settled into a deep, thoughtful blue. Marcus, the professor said slowly, I think it's time someone told you who your grandfather really was. Part 2 Professor Thane activated the holographic display system, and the engineering bay filled with stars. Not the simple star charts Marcus had grown accustomed to in his navigation classes, but a three-dimensional map of what looked like a battlefield. Ships hung frozen in space, some recognizable as Galactic Alliance vessels, others completely alien in design. 57 years ago, Professor Thane began, his deep voice carrying the weight of history. The galaxy faced its darkest hour. The Void Seekers had conquered 17 systems and were advancing toward the core worlds. Their technology was unlike anything we had encountered. Ships that could phase through our shields, weapons that consumed matter itself, and, worst of all, they seemed to understand our technology better than we did. Marcus stared at the display, recognizing some of the ship designs from historical archives. But these weren't museum pieces or textbook images. These recordings showed vessels torn apart, space stations cracked open like eggs, entire planets stripped of their atmospheres. The Alliance was losing, Professor Thane continued. Our greatest engineers, including the most brilliant Zephyrian minds, could not adapt our technology fast enough to counter their advances. Every solution we implemented, they overcame within days. It was as if they could predict our thinking patterns. The hologram shifted, focusing on a particular sector of space where a small fleet of human vessels was engaged with Void Seeker forces. Marcus noticed immediately that the human ships looked different from the standard Alliance designs. Their modifications were crude by galactic standards, but they were fighting effectively against the alien invaders. Then the humans arrived. Professor Thane's scales shifted to a warm gold. Earth had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel and was barely considered worthy of Alliance membership. Most species viewed humans as primitive, aggressive, and unpredictable. But those very qualities proved to be exactly what we needed. Marcus watched his species' ships dancing through the Void Seeker formations, using maneuvers that looked chaotic but were devastatingly effective. They fought differently. More than that, they thought differently. When Zephyr engineers approached a problem, they followed logical, established principles. When Draknari tacticians planned a battle, they relied on proven strategies from thousands of years of experience. But humans... Professor Thane gestured to the display where a human vessel had just rammed itself into a Void Seeker dreadnought while ejecting its fusion core. Humans improvisa. The scene changed, showing a massive space station that Marcus recognized as the now legendary Bastion Station. But this version looked different, its surface covered with what appeared to be rough modifications and jury-rigged additions. The Alliance Command brought in human engineers to examine Void Seeker technology we had captured, while our best minds spent months carefully analyzing each component according to proper procedures. The humans simply started taking things apart and putting them back together in new ways. They called it reverse engineering, but it was more like controlled chaos. Marcus felt a strange pride swelling in his chest. He had grown up hearing stories about human ingenuity, but seeing it demonstrated on this scale was breathtaking. Your grandfather, Professor Thane said quietly, was part of a small team of human mechanics and engineers assigned to retrofit Alliance vessels. They worked 18-hour shifts in conditions that would have killed most species, rebuilding our ships from the inside out. They didn't follow Alliance engineering protocols. They didn't use approved materials or standard procedures. They just made things work. The display zoomed in on a particular ship, and Marcus gasped. It was clearly a Zephyrian cruiser, but it had been so extensively modified that it barely resembled its original design. Weapons jutted from impossible angles, additional engines had been bolted wherever space allowed, and the entire hull was covered with what looked like improvised armor plating. "The Thunderbolt," Professor Thane said with something that might have been admiration in his voice. "Your grandfather's masterpiece." He took a damaged Zephyrian heavy cruiser and rebuilt it into something that could match a Voidseeker dreadnought in single combat. The ship shouldn't have worked. By every principle of proper engineering, it should have torn itself apart the moment it engaged its engines. But it didn't, Marcus whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. It didn't. Instead, it became the flagship that led the final assault against the Voidseeker command vessel. James Chun, human mechanic, age 24, took a ship designed by the galaxy's most advanced engineers and made it better through sheer stubborn determination and an absolute refusal to accept that something couldn't be improved. The hologram showed the final battle, human-modified ships working alongside conventional Alliance forces to drive back the Voidseeker fleet. Marcus watched his grandfather's ship, the impossible fusion of human ingenuity and alien technology, leading the charge into the heart of the enemy formation. The war ended because of that battle, Professor Thane continued. But the Alliance had learned something important. Human engineering wasn't inferior to ours. It was different. Where we saw established principles, humans saw suggestions. Where we saw limitations, humans saw challenges. And, most importantly, where we saw perfection that shouldn't be changed, humans saw starting points for improvement. Marcus stared at the display, his mind racing. That's why everyone went quiet when they heard his name. Your grandfather didn't just serve in the war, Marcus. He helped save the galaxy. And every ship that flies today carries modifications based on techniques he and his team developed. The Alliance Engineering Corps studied human methods for decades, tried to understand how you could make intuitive leaps that our most advanced computers couldn't calculate. Professor Thane's scales shifted to deep blue, indicating serious contemplation. Which brings us to your engine modifications. The techniques you used, the way you approach the problem, the instinctive understanding of system integration. He paused, studying Marcus carefully. You're not just James Chen's grandson. You're his successor. The weight of that statement settled over Marcus like a physical force. Around him, the hologram continued to display scenes from the war, showing again and again how human innovation had turned the tide against impossible odds. Now, do you understand why your classmates stopped laughing? Professor Thane asked softly. Part 3 words spread through the academy faster than a plasma leak in a fusion core. By the next morning, Marcus found himself surrounded by a strange mixture of curiosity, fear, and something that made him deeply uncomfortable, reverence. Aliens who had mocked his modifications the day before now watched him work with the intensity of predators studying prey. In the Academy's vast library complex, Marcus sat alone at a terminal, scrolling through declassified war records. The official histories painted broad strokes about human contributions, but the detailed engineering reports told a different story. His grandfather's name appeared in dozens of technical documents, usually followed by phrases like unprecedented innovation and theoretically impossible, but functionally superior. Fascinating reading. Marcus turned to find Vyra approaching, her crystalline form chiming softly as she moved. Unlike yesterday's mocking tones, her harmonic voice carried genuine curiosity. Just trying to understand what Professor Thane told me. Marcus replied carefully. He had learned that information traveled quickly through the Academy's alien grapevine, and he wasn't sure how he felt about his newfound notoriety. Vyra's surface shimmered with patterns that Marcus had learned indicated deep thought among her species. My grandmother fought in the war. She was part of the engineering corps that tried to analyze captured Voidseeker technology before your grandfather's team was brought in. What was that like? Humiliating, according to her. Vira's form brightened with what Marcus recognized as rueful humor. 18 months of careful analysis, following every protocol, documenting every component. They produced a detailed report explaining why Void Seeker technology was incompatible with Alliance systems and couldn't be integrated effectively. Marcus waited for the rest of the story. Then, your grandfather looked at the same technology for 3 days, took it apart with a plasma cutter and some manual tools, and built a weapon that could punch through Void Seeker shields. He didn't even write a proper report, just left a handwritten note that said works better if you reverse the polarity and ignore the warning labels. Despite everything, Marcus laughed. That sounded exactly like something his grandfather would do. The old man had never met a warning label he couldn't creatively interpret. She told me something else, Vira continued, her voice dropping to barely audible chimes. The Alliance Command wanted to study your grandfather after the war. Not in a harmful way, but they couldn't understand how human thinking worked. How you could look at systems that had been perfected over millennia and immediately see improvements. What did they find? Nothing useful. Human brains aren't fundamentally different from most other species. But the way you approach problems. Vira paused, her crystalline structure ringing with harmonics that suggested she was choosing her words carefully. Most species see a machine and think about how it was designed to work. Humans see a machine and think about how it could work better. Marcus considered this. He remembered countless afternoons in his grandfather's workshop, watching the old man tear apart perfectly functional equipment just to see if he could make it run more efficiently. At the time, it had seemed like destructive curiosity. Now, he wondered if it was something more fundamental to human nature. Is that why everyone's acting so strange around me? Before Vira could answer, Kextar appeared at their table, his 4 arms carrying a stack of data tablets. The insectoid's compound eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made the human student uncomfortable. I have been researching, Kextar announced without preamble. Human engineering techniques from the war period. The modifications you made to your training engine yesterday match patterns from 17 different combat retrofits documented in the archives. I just made it more efficient, Marcus protested. It wasn't anything complicated. That's what makes it terrifying, Kextar replied flatly. You performed modifications that took Alliance engineering teams months to understand and implement, and you did it instinctively during a class exercise. Without blueprints, without computer modeling, without even understanding the theoretical basis for why it worked. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks again. Are you saying humans are just lucky? No. The voice belonged to Vornek, the gaseous being whose environmental suit hissed softly as he approached. We're saying humans are dangerous. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt his hands clench involuntarily, but before he could respond, Vornek continued. Dangerous to the established order. Dangerous to conventional thinking. Dangerous to anyone who believes that technology has reached its limits. The gaseous alien's translator added an electronic chuckle. My people are traitors. We understand value. And we learned during the war that human innovation is the most valuable commodity in the galaxy. Which is why the Academy accepted you despite your planet's limited technological development, Vira added. And why every major corporation in Alliance space has human engineers on their design teams. And why warships built with human modifications are considered the most effective in the galaxy. Marcus looked around the library, suddenly aware that other students were watching their conversation. Not with the casual curiosity he had grown accustomed to, but with the focused attention of beings who were trying to understand something important. You still haven't answered my question, he said quietly. Why is everyone acting afraid of me? Kextar's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was the insectoid equivalent of a grim smile. Because your grandfather didn't just save the galaxy from the Void Seekers. He proved that human thinking could revolutionize technology that we had considered perfect for thousands of years. And if one human mechanic could do that, what could an entire generation of trained human engineers accomplish? Fornek finished. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He wasn't just James Chin's grandson. He was a representative of humanity's potential to reshape galactic civilization. Every modification he made, every problem he solved differently from his alien classmates, was proof that human thinking could challenge the established technological order. "That's a lot of pressure," he said finally. "Yes," Vira chimed softly. "It is. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Marcus looked down at his hands, remembering the feel of working on the engine yesterday. The satisfaction of seeing a system work better than it was designed to. The joy of solving a puzzle that others had accepted as complete. "I'm going to keep building things," he said, "and I'm going to make them better." Around the table, his alien classmates exchanged glances that carried messages in languages Marcus couldn't speak, but somehow understood perfectly. They weren't just watching him anymore. They were recognizing him as something that could change their understanding of what was possible. The real question was whether the galaxy was ready for another Chun. Part 4 3 weeks later, the Academy's emergency klaxons shattered the artificial night cycle across the station. Marcus jolted awake in his dormitory as red emergency lighting bathed everything in an ominous glow. His roommate, a methane-breathing Kalori named Slicks, was already moving toward their environmental suits with the practiced efficiency of someone who had lived through real emergencies. "What's happening?" Marcus called out as he struggled into his emergency gear. "Hull breach in Section 7. Slicks replied through his translator, his voice carrying the characteristic whistle of his species when stressed. "Training exercises don't trigger full evacuation protocols. This is real." They joined a stream of students and faculty moving through the Academy's corridors toward emergency stations. Marcus noticed immediately that they weren't heading for evacuation pods, but toward the engineering bays. Professor Thane's voice boomed through the station's communication system, his words clipped and urgent. "All senior engineering students report to Emergency Bay Alpha. This is not a drill. We have a situation that requires immediate technical intervention." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Emergency Bay Alpha was where the Academy kept its most advanced equipment, the systems too dangerous for normal classroom use. If they needed students there, something had gone very wrong. The emergency bay was chaos. Professor Thane stood beside a massive holographic display, showing a ship Marcus didn't recognize. It was clearly alien, but not of any species he had studied. The vessel's hull was a twisted amalgamation of organic curves and crystalline growths, pulsing with an unsettling bioluminescent glow. "Listen carefully," Professor Thane announced as the students gathered. 20 minutes ago, this vessel emerged from hyperspace near the Academy. It is severely damaged and appears to be fleeing something. The pilot is requesting sanctuary and emergency assistance. Kextar raised one of his forearms. "Professor, what species is this?" "I don't recognize the ship design." Professor Thane's scales shifted to deep purple, indicating high stress. "Because they are refugees from outside our galaxy. They call themselves the Inheritors, and according to their emergency transmission, they are the last survivors of something they call the Great Consumption." Marcus stared at the alien ship on the display. Parts of its hull were clearly missing, and strange energy patterns flickered across its surface like dying lightning. But what caught his attention were the modifications someone had made to the basic structure. Additions and alterations that looked almost familiar. "What do they need from us?" Vira asked, her crystalline form chiming with nervous energy. "Their ship is dying," Professor Thane replied bluntly. "Their life support will fail within 6 hours, and their engines are too damaged to reach the nearest starbase. They need emergency repairs, but their technology is completely incompatible with our systems. So we can't help them," Vornex stated flatly. "Not with conventional methods," Professor Thane agreed, his golden eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made the human student feel suddenly exposed. "Which is why I've called you all here. This situation requires the kind of thinking that doesn't follow standard protocols." Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him. The weight of expectation was overwhelming, but as he studied the alien ship on the display, his mind was already working. The modifications he could see weren't random. Someone had been trying to integrate incompatible technologies, just like his grandfather had done during the war. Have they responded to direct communication? Marcus asked, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Limited, Professor Thane replied. Their communication systems are heavily damaged. We've managed to establish basic contact, but detailed technical discussions are impossible. Marcus stepped closer to the display, his eyes tracking the energy patterns across the ship's hull. Those modifications on their ship, they look like emergency repairs, but they're using principles I don't recognize. It's like they've been trying to adapt their technology to work with something else. What are you thinking? Professor Thane asked. I'm thinking that whoever made those repairs faced the same problem we're facing now. Incompatible systems that needed to work together. Marcus turned to face the room. We can't fix their ship using our technology, and they can't fix it using theirs. But maybe we can do what humans do best. Which is? Kextar asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Make something new that shouldn't work, but does anyway. Professor Thane's scales shifted to orange, indicating cautious optimism. What do you need? Marcus looked around the room at his classmates, seeing not just alien students, but potential collaborators with different ways of thinking and understanding technology. I need a team. Vira, your people understand crystal-based energy systems better than anyone. Kextar, Zephyrian engineering is built on modular integration. Vornek, your species has experience with atmospheric manipulation. Slick's Calori technology uses biomechanical interfaces. And what will you contribute? Vornek asked. Marcus smiled, feeling his grandfather's confidence flowing through him. I'll contribute what humans always contribute. I'll make it work. The next 4 hours were a controlled frenzy of activity. Marcus found himself coordinating a team that was simultaneously brilliant and completely incompatible. Vira's crystalline precision clashed with Kextar's modular approach. Vornek's gaseous nature made physical coordination nearly impossible. Slick's biomechanical thinking seemed to conflict with everyone else's purely technological focus. But Marcus began to see patterns, not in the technologies themselves, but in how different species approached problems. Vira saw energy as music, harmonies that needed to be balanced. Kextar saw systems as puzzles with pieces that could be rearranged. Vornek understood flow and pressure in ways that solid-base life forms couldn't grasp. Slick saw technology as living things that needed to be nurtured rather than controlled. Stop thinking like engineers, Marcus told them as they stood around a hastily assembled collection of components from a dozen different technologies. Start thinking like mechanics. We're not building a perfect system. We're building something that will keep people alive long enough to get them to safety. That's not how proper engineering works, Kextar protested. No, Marcus agreed, picking up a plasma cutter and eyeing a Zephyrian power coupling that was definitely not designed to be modified. It's how human engineering works. And right now, that's what we need. As he began cutting into the pristine alien technology, Marcus could hear his grandfather's voice echoing in his memory. Sometimes, boy, you've got to break things to make them better. The trick is knowing which things can handle being broken. The emergency klaxons were still wailing, counting down the time they had left to save a ship full of aliens who had traveled between galaxies seeking sanctuary. But for the first time since the crisis began, Marcus felt confident. He wasn't just James Chin's grandson anymore. He was proving that human ingenuity could save lives across any distance, with any technology, against any odds. He just hoped 6 hours would be enough time to prove it. Hashtag Part 5 with 37 minutes remaining on the alien ship's life support. Marcus made the final connection. The hybrid device they had created looked like nothing that should exist in a rational universe. Zephyrian modules jury-rigged to Draknari power systems, connected through Vira's crystalline resonance matrices, regulated by Vornek's atmosphere processors, and controlled by Slick's biomechanical interfaces. The entire assembly was held together by human engineering tape and sheer determination. "This is insane," Kextar muttered, his four arms gesticulating at their creation. 17 different incompatible technologies integrated through methods that violate basic engineering principles. It shouldn't work. But it does, Vira chimed, her crystalline form bright with excitement as she monitored the energy flows. The resonance patterns are chaotic, but stable. It's like watching 17 different songs combine into one harmony that shouldn't exist, but somehow sounds perfect. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he made the final calibrations. Through the Academy's viewports, he could see the alien ship hanging in space like a dying star. Its bioluminescent glow was fading, and sections of its organic hull had gone completely dark. "Initiate transport sequence," Professor Thane commanded from the control station. His scales had been cycling through nervous colors for the past hour, but now they settled into determined gold. The hybrid device hummed to life, its impossible combination of technologies creating harmonics that made Marcus's teeth ache. Energy beams lanced out toward the alien vessel, not to repair it directly, but to establish a bridge between their incompatible systems. "Contact established," Vornek reported, his gaseous form rippling with excitement. "Their ship is responding. Power levels increasing across all systems." On the main display, the alien vessel's glow began to strengthen. Sections that had gone dark flickered back to life, and the chaotic energy patterns across its hull began to stabilize into something that looked almost like normal operation. "Life support nominal," Slicks announced, his translator crackling with emotion that didn't quite translate. "Propulsion systems show green across all indicators. They're going to make it." The emergency bay erupted in cheers from a dozen different species, creating a cacophony of clicks, chimes, whistles, and roars that somehow sounded like pure celebration. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief, but before he could fully process their success, new alarms began sounding. "Multiple hyperspace signatures detecting," Professor Thane announced, his voice cutting through the celebration. "Something big is coming." The display shifted to show the space around the Academy, and Marcus felt his blood turn cold. Ships were emerging from hyperspace, but these weren't like anything in the Alliance databases. They looked like living nightmares, their hulls flowing and shifting like liquid metal, covered in what appeared to be mechanical parasites that fed on light itself. "The Devourers," a new voice said, transmitted through their emergency communication link with the alien ship. The voice was melodious, but carried harmonics of absolute terror. "They have found us. The great consumption continues." "How many?" Professor Thane demanded. "Too many," the alien voice replied. "Our ship carries the last genetic templates of our species, the final survivors of 12 worlds. We have fled across the void between galaxies, but they follow. They consume everything: technology, biology, energy itself. They turn all matter into extensions of their collective hunger." Marcus stared at the display as more nightmare ships continued emerging from hyperspace. Dozens, then hundreds, their dark hulls seeming to absorb the light from nearby stars. These weren't just invaders like the Void Seekers had been. These were something worse. Something that didn't want to conquer or control, but simply to consume everything that existed. "Academy Station to all Alliance vessels," Professor Thane broadcast. "Emergency assistance required. We have refugees under protection and hostile forces approaching." The response was immediate but not encouraging. "Academy Station, this is Battle Group 7. We're 6 hours out at maximum burn. Can you maintain position until reinforcements arrive?" Marcus looked at the alien fleet on the display, counting the ships and calculating their approach vectors. 6 hours is too long. They'll reach us in 90 minutes. The Academy's shields won't hold against that many ships, Kextar observed grimly. And our defensive systems are designed for training, not actual combat. "Then we don't fight them defensively," Marcus said quietly, his mind racing through possibilities. Everyone in the emergency bay turned to look at him, and he realized he was thinking out loud. We fight them like humans. What do you mean? Professor Thane asked. Marcus gestured at their hybrid device, still maintaining its connection to the alien ship. We just proven that incompatible technologies can be made to work together. The Academy has training systems for every known type of technology in Alliance space. Weapons, shields, engines, all of it designed to be safe and controllable. Safe and controllable won't stop a fleet of planet killers, Vornek pointed out. No, Marcus agreed, feeling his grandfather's spirit flowing through him. But unsafe and uncontrollable might. What if we stop trying to make everything work properly and start making everything work better? Understanding began to dawn on his classmates' faces, followed immediately by expressions of horror at what he was suggesting. You want to jury-rig the entire Academy, Vira said, her harmonic voice carrying notes of awe and terror. Turn a training station into a warship using methods that will probably violate every safety protocol in Alliance space, Kextar added. Create weapons and defenses that shouldn't exist using technologies that were never meant to work together, Slicks concluded. Exactly, Marcus said, moving toward the engineering station. Professor Thane, I need access to every system on the station. Every training device, every experimental prototype, every piece of equipment we've got. Professor Thane's scales cycled through 12 different colors before settling on determined silver. This is completely against regulations. It could destroy the Academy, kill everyone aboard, and violate approximately 400 safety protocols. Yes, sir. And it's exactly what your grandfather would have done. The massive Draknari's toothy grin was terrifying and magnificent. Do it. Emergency authorization granted. All students, consider this your final examination. Pass or fail, save the Academy, or die trying. As Marcus began pulling up system diagrams and his classmates scattered to begin the most impossible engineering project in Academy history, he thought about his grandfather's words one more time. The best engineers always get laughed at first. Then, they changed the galaxy. Today, Marcus wasn't going to change the galaxy. He was going to save it. And he was going to do it by breaking every rule his grandfather had ever taught him to follow.